Welcome to Planetary Calendar. I'm Ralph De Amicis, and this is our annual Chinese New Year forecast. And this year it actually almost coincides to our yearly forecast. In fact, it may actually serve in both roles because this year the Chinese New Year is on January 24th, 2020, which is very early in the year because the Chinese New Year is the new moon in Aquarius, which can run any place from about January 19th all the way up to February 19th. So this year is what we would call an early spring, because that's what the Chinese call their Chinese New Year. They don't call it the New Year, they call it the Springtime Festival, because it's after this point that the seeds will sprout and we get off to the new year. We like using this chart for a full year forecast because it tells us the nature of the seeds. And whatever the seed is, ultimately it's going to have a big influence on what the plant becomes. When you plant an acorn, you can figure you're going to get an oak tree. If you plant a wheat kernel, you can't expect to get an oak tree. You're going to get wheat. So it tells us a lot about the nature of this year. And this is the year of the metal rat. Now, there's the 12 Chinese animal years, and the rat is considered the first one in the sequence. So it's a way of saying that we're starting a new sequence. Metal, those are the five what are called elements. The Chinese call them elements. They're not really elements in terms of the West. What they tell us is which planet are they most related to. And what it's telling us is that in the year of the rat, which basically is Jupiter, is going to be in Capricorn this year, for the first part of the year. And metal, it means that it's very related to Mercury, which is the mercurial metal planet, which means it's a year for great commerce. It's a great year for communications, for travel, local travel. Also a great year for astrologers. Did I mention that? Because astrologers have a certain mercurial quality. It's also, it's like physicians. The symbol of the physician has to do with Gemini. So let's look at what's going to happen this year. And every year we do two major charts. We do a chart for Washington, D.C., actually for Philadelphia, because that's where the seed was first planted. And we do a chart for California. Why? That's because we're where we are, in other words, where we're planted. And it also gives us the two coasts, so it gives you a very strong kind of picture of what's going on. And this is a very interesting year for a bunch of reasons. In the last part of 2019, Jupiter entered Capricorn. And so as we're going into 2020, we have a whole group of planets in the very staid, ambitious, hardworking sign of Capricorn. It includes both Jupiter and Saturn, two biggies, right? Pluto, small but feisty. The major asteroid Ceres, which is the largest asteroid in the asteroid belt. Pallas Athena, which is another one of the large asteroids right there. And what's called the South Node. The South Node is the lunar node, and it's all about, if we were doing a chart for individuals, we would be talking about the reincarnational experiences, your karma and your dharma. But it has a lot to do with our history. How much are we tapping into our history? And it has a lot of times has to do with our matriarchal history because it's the moon's nodes, and the moon, of course, relates more to the female than to the male. So what we're seeing with these planets going through this very conservative area is a regrounding to the feminine archetypes, the matrilineal line. Now, the actual conjunction of the sun and the moon is at 4 degrees Aquarius. Mercury is also in Aquarius. Mercury is a little later at 13 degrees, which is interesting because, as I mentioned, Mercury is a real important player because this is a mercurial year. It's a metal year. And Mercury in Aquarius is a brilliant position. It's one of these people, these people who they just get, like you're talking to them and like lightning bolts land in their ideas and in their heads and ideas pop out their mouths. That's a Mercury and Aquarius person. You're going to see a lot of that kind of stuff. You're going to see people coming up with innovative ideas this year, especially young people. And then at the same time, Venus is in Pisces, which is also a very important position to consider the exaltation position of Venus. It's very extrovert, but it's a lot about networking. And both Mercury and Venus are in positions that have a huge amount to do with networking. Venus has to do with compassion when it's in Pisces. It also happens to be probably a very good year for the winemakers and the alcohol makers, because Venus in Pisces is about illusion and feeling better and liquids that make you feel better. What that's, on the other hand, on the less positive side, Neptune is also there, which really enhances this sense of the illusion. And it may be that we continue to see serious problems going on, especially in the medical field, because from Washington, D.C., it's up in the ninth house, which has to do with the medical field. Venus and Neptune in the ninth house have a lot to do with the opioid epidemic and the general drug epidemic, and that it could be that the government starts putting a lot more money towards this, that people start saying, you really have to invest in this if we're going to make any progress. The opioids they're a very seductive type of drug, and people will do a great deal and spend a great deal of money to not be in pain. And the thing about opioids is that it just blocks out all those low frequencies, and people like living in those areas. And once they get there, it's hard to get them back into like the nitty-gritty world. But that's where health is. That's where your future is. That's where the reality of being in incarnation is. So hopefully what we're seeing is from this Neptune and Venus in the ninth house is a lot more money being spent in that area, which would be wonderful to see. Now, the sun and the moon are actually in the eighth house in the chart for Washington, D.C., which is it's a position about shared power. A lot of what's going on in the United States today, especially on the East Coast, is going to be going on behind the scenes. So whatever you're seeing going on, don't assume that's all that's going on. That a lot of what's going on is secret agreements. A lot of maneuvering is going to be going on behind the scenes. There's going to be a lot spoken about compassion, of course, with that Venus and Pisces with Neptune. But at the midheaven is Aries. There's going to be a lot of people speaking out this year. And Chiron is there, which is the wounded healer. A lot of people are going to be speaking out in Washington about the country or the government being wounded, that it's been wounded. You're going to hear that one a lot, especially because, and that it's affecting the health of the country. And the reason is that Aries at the midheaven is being ruled by Mars and Sagittarius in the sixth house of health. So there's going to be a lot of these symptomologies we're going to see this year. A lot of issues we're going to see this year with people acting out are going to do with health issues related to feeling like the American psyche has been wounded, which is not a huge leap. You don't have to be an astrologer to be able to say that. I mean, and you just look around and you see that. If being a healthy being is one that's well integrated, the different sides of the personality are integrated, and being wounded is when these sides get out of sync. Whoa, we're definitely a little out of sync in some ways. Now, what's interesting is that at the rising on the East Coast is Cancer. And it goes back to the moon in the eighth house. Once again, these back behind the scenes activities. But Astrea, the asteroid Astrea, is rising. And that's real interesting because Astrea is all about legal issues. So do you think that maybe legal issues are going to be a big issue in 2020? Well, once again, you don't have to be an astrologer to know that, especially in Washington and such. Now, the cool thing about this is that this chart is active along the East Coast. So those poor people living on the East Coast, there's going to be a lot of stuff to watch on TV. The rest of the country, well, yeah, it's going to be on TV, but it's not going to affect us as much. And when we look at the chart for California, it's a different world, which, of course it is. But out here in California, the Sun, Moon, Mercury conjunction are in the ninth house. Now, this is the house of looking towards the future. At the midheaven, we have the midheaven is actually in the ninth house. in Aquarius. So once again, it's really looking at, we're going to see people on the West Coast saying, we need to look at ways in which we bring our society together and work on things together. We need to be able to make sure our voice is reaching out. One thing is about a metal year, a Mercury-ruled year, and Mercury in Aquarius, it's all about communications. Are people's voices being heard? And that's going to be the big thing on the West Coast. On the East Coast, not so much. On the East Coast, it's going to be hard to tell what people are saying because when you have Venus in the ninth house with Neptune in Pisces, it's the house that relates to lawyers. A lot of people are going to be lying. A lot of people are going to be making stuff up. A lot of people are going to be drunk. A lot of people are going to be drugged. So, don't plan on getting any type of realistic information out of the media or out of professionals, you might say, politicians, professionals, people who are normally are experts. We'll see. On the West Coast, it's very different. People are going to speak out, and you're going to be able to trust them. Venus and Neptune are going to be up in the 10th house. I would expect that the wine industry would do really well this year with Venus and Pisces in the exalted position in the 10th house. Good year for wine. Not at all surprisingly. We got Mercury, a Mercury-ruled sign, Gemini rising in a Mercury year. So once again, it's going to be really on its game. You have to remember that California is a Mercury-ruled state. It was started in Virgo, September 9th. So it likes when Mercury's a player. Having Venus opposite Virgo, you might feel a little challenged about that. But, there's a certain, where Pisces might have to do with wine, Virgo relates to winemakers. And it's because Virgo was at the time of the harvest. And so there's been always a natural, it's one of the places where they actually get together and work well together. Also in California on the West Coast, and this goes all the way up the coast, of course, Seattle, Oregon, we have Mars at the descendant. The descendant is the opposite of the rising. The rising sign is what you see rising in the east. The descending sign is what is descending in the west. What's there? Mars in Sagittarius. The 7th house has to do with your partnerships. There's going to be people from foreign lands, Mars and Sagittarius, foreign lands, people who are wanting to make partnerships with California or people in California. There's going to be a lot of movement towards international commerce or even national commerce, connections outside of the state. Because once again, all those planets up in the 9th house, that has to do with people who we get help from far away. What else is going on? Oh, you have that whole concentration of planets in Capricorn in the 8th house, and there's going to be a lot of people, making decisions based upon the facts. Capricorn loves the facts. They love facts and figures. And actually what we did was we also looked at the bi-wheels, the chart with California on the inside and then the Chinese New Year on the outside. What's interesting is that in that chart, California has Mars rising. And so Mars is showing up on the angles in both situations. Well, and Mars in Sagittarius, and with all this concentration in Capricorn, our biggest epidemic out here are fires. We're having major problems here with fires, and we're addressing it in pretty practical ways, though sometimes very difficult ways. With Mars rising, people are very aware of this. And with all these planets going through the 2nd house of California, I think that people are going to start making sure that money's seriously invested into starting to solve these problems, really investing in the infrastructure, not only of the electrical system of the grid, but also of the roadways. Well, Capricorn is trees. And then you have all these planets in the 3rd house in the very electrified sign of Aquarius. It's important to realize that it's not the wind that knocks the wires down. It's that the wind knocks the dead trees down, and then the trees fall on the wires. So part of the process is going through and removing the possible trees that can fall on the lines. This is something that's been going on actually for a past couple of years here, and it seems like a whole bunch of money may get spent on it this year as well. And make some serious progress, because eventually you do make progress on this stuff. Now, the next thing we look at, and this gets real interesting, we look at what's called the astrocartography. And these are actually the maps of where the lines from the planets are crossing over us. Like when we look up, where are the planets? For instance, at noontime, you would look up overhead, and there's the sun. So if we looked at the chart, at the actual map, there would be a yellow line coming down right through where you're standing. Really relatively simple. It gets more complicated in application. But it tells us a lot when we look at the Chinese New Year about where things are going to be happening. And there's been a number of years where a lot of stuff is going on in the United States. This year, not so much. It's interesting. There's peripheral stuff going on. You would think with a big election and such, you would have, more stuff going on. But the two major planets passing up over the United States are Venus and Neptune again. And Venus is passing right through Denver, Colorado. So apparently the cannabis industry is going to be doing very well this year. And Neptune, which has a lot to do with petrochemicals, is passing right through Oklahoma and Texas, the heart of the fracking industry. So figure that both cannabis and oil are going to be doing very well this year, and they're both going to get a lot of energy. What's interesting is off the East Coast, it's kind of an interesting facet. Uranus is off the coast, and it's Uranus in Taurus. And it's actually out fairly far off the coast, by the mouth of the St. Lawrence River, which, is the route by which a major amount of our international shipping comes in. And it's always been symbolic of that for a certain reason. And as a result, I think we may see a lot of disruption in terms of our international shipping, especially with Europe. So it may be that these tariffs get even more ballistic than they've been already. So and then on the West Coast, off the coast of California, you have Mercury in Aquarius. Mercury in Aquarius is all about change. It may be that California, Seattle, Washington State, Portland, that these states, and also all the way down into Mexico, that they start kind of demanding more sovereignty over their own waters. There's been a big issue, for instance, where they wanted to allow more drilling of oil off the coast of California. And this was one of the first things that, when the current administration got into office, they started doing lines, opening it up for more oil drilling. And California immediately fought them. And I remember, I think it was for that Jerry Brown said, this lawsuit's going to last longer than this administration. Because Californians don't want it. We have enough oil wells out here. We have an awful lot of electrified cars and a lot of solar panels, and we know which direction we want to go, because when there is a lot of pollution, we get smog. Californians are very, very aware of this. And so it may be that they really want to gain more sovereignty off the coast here, because one of the lines going along the coast is the descending Mars line. It's about taking personal power, and it's Mars and Sagittarius, and about looking towards the future. Now, internationally, it gets real interesting when you look at the charts. And here, there's two different major lines you look at. There's rising and setting lines. And those are important. But there's what's called the IC and the MC lines. MC is overhead. What's going on above you? What's going on in the outer world? IC is below your feet, and it tells you where you're grounded. And for many years in astrocartography, everyone was focused on the MC line. They're saying, you want to work on your career, work on your life, and you want to have a wonderful time, then go to your Venus MC line, or you want to have a wonderful career, go to your Jupiter MC line. Jupiter is about expansion, MC is about your career. There's a certain misogyny that goes on inside of astrology, where everything for centuries was focused on what's going on in the outer world, and it was because of the fact that The people who were paying for the charts were typically people in business. Back in the 14, 15, 1600s, it was sea captains. When should I send my ship out? When is my ship going to come in? It was all about commerce. Going back to the Greeks, it was the same thing. We're going to go to war. When's a good time to go to war? People didn't do charts about their personal lives. And yet, how much of our time is spent in the outer world? How much of our time is spent on the inner world with our personal world, our families, our friends, our daily work, our personal growth? It's very split between the two. Both are important. And yet, like I said, there was certain misogyny in astrology where it really focused on one and denied the other. Luckily, in recent years, and this is really probably since for the last 40 or 50 years, though it goes back actually to Evangeline Adams, who was a famous astrologer in the early part of the 20th century. He was actually the granddaughter of one of the President Adams. Was a very famous astrologer from New York who started looking at this more, who started bringing this to light, you might say. There was a whole string of very good women astrologers who started adding some greater dimension to the art, you might say. And that line is what's called the IC line. It's about where do you feel at home. And for instance, many times people say, well, go to your Sun MC line. Well, when you get there, it all becomes about your responsibilities out in the world. It has almost nothing to do with how do I feel about where I live. Where if you move to your Sun IC line, you suddenly feel at home. Why? Because you are the center of where you are standing. Same thing with your Venus line. You move to your Venus line. If it's the Venus MC line, you're going to be out at the bars. You're going to be out at the music festivals. You're going to be out in the world. But if it's your Venus IC line, it's about creating a beautiful home for yourself. It's about creating wonderful meals for yourself. It's about having a lovely garden. It's about that inner part of the world. What's interesting, and many times where the IC line is where you have a tremendous amount of leverage. And that's what this whole explanation is leading up to. Where are the IC lines this year? Who's pulling the strings? And that's where it gets real interesting. The major IC lines for the sun and the moon are all in the Middle East. And the lines literally go up through Saudi Arabia, Iran, all the way north, right through the main street of Moscow. So that's where the strings are going to get pulled from this year. Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Moscow. That's who's pulling the strings. Where the MC lines are actually way off they're off in the ocean. They're out someplace over Hawaii. Hawaii may bring a lot of different things to light this year, but that's not where the strings are going to get pulled from. So, like I said, remember how I said in the Washington chart, a lot of stuff that's going to be going on this year is going on behind the scenes. And this is it's a little bit ominous in terms of that. For those people who love conspiracy theories, if you're involved with anything to do with the East Coast, it's going to be a fertile field for you. There's going to be lots of opportunities for coming up and discovering maybe conspiracy theories, because it's like the old expression from the 60s and 70s. You're not paranoid if people really are out to get you. Well, it's not a theory if there really is a conspiracy. And there's going to be plenty of conspiracies going on this year on the East Coast. On the West Coast, not so much. Though on the West Coast, because of the concentration of the Capricorn up in the 8th house, there could be old money, you might say, like the big money interests will definitely be doing things behind the scenes, but the results will be better. It's because of that Sun, Moon, and Mercury up in the 9th house. The results are going to be better. It's going to be about a realization of the importance of creating a beneficial future, which tell you the truth, I'm happy we live out on the West Coast. Though I love a conspiracy as much as anybody. Poor Venezuela. Every year, Venezuela has had some major troublemaker overhead. I think last year it was Mars. This year it has Uranus right overhead in Taurus. So they're probably going to see even more of a collapse with their finances. Uranus moved into Taurus a number of years ago, and ever since then we've had more fires. Oklahoma has become the earthquake capital of America. We've had the hottest days on records, and it's because Uranus is about disruption. Taurus is about the Earth. We start disrupting the Earth. What do you get? You get massive expressions of climate change. So, poor Venezuela. And then, what else is going on? China's really getting a bit of a pass this year. There was a whole series of years when China was really growing, where it was having this spectacular growth every year. Every year there were major planets overhead saying, hey, look at China. This year the only thing overhead is Juno, a relatively minor asteroid. And then though there is an icy Uranus line that you have to pay attention to that's going right through Hong Kong. So you can figure that Hong Kong, especially for the next 6-7 months, is going to continue to have disruption. And there it's Uranus disrupting the status quo, Taurus. China in many ways is the Taurian country. It moves steadily, it's self-contained. There was, I think, a 500-year period where people were forbidden to come and go. They actually burned down 50 miles of forest near the coast, so no one could pass without being seen. They're very Taurian, very stubborn, very self-centered. And Uranus and Taurus, running right up along the coast, it will definitely pop out in Hong Kong. It may also affect Shanghai and the other business cities as well. But we're already seeing it in Hong Kong. It's amazing how many times when you look at this chart, you're seeing a lot of these things going on already. What it's telling us is what's going to keep sustaining, and helps us figure out what are the primary stories that are going on. What are the central stories, and how are they going to keep going on? We've been looking actually about what's the polarity to this chart, and maybe not the polarity, what's the complement to this chart later in the year. And we've been looking at different charts, maybe the new moon in Libra or the full moon in Libra is my next best guess. And I'm thinking of doing a chart for that year, and halfway through the year, maybe at the springtime equinox, doing a forecast for the later part of the year based upon that. We'll see. It's still in the research. So I wish you a great year of the metal rat, and come back and see us again at Planetary Calendar. And if you'd like to see the monthly forecasts, visit planetarycalendar.com and look for recent forecasts. And those are short, just 8 to 10 minutes with Ralph and Lonnie, give you an idea of what's going on. Wishing you well.